Hello friends, and welcome back to my channel. Today I thought I would bring you along for a fall activity that I've never really shown online. I talk a lot about my garden on social media. It is a little hobby that I have that I really enjoy, and I never really talk about how to prepare for a takedown in the end of the season. So I thought we could have a gardening chat, and then I can also show you how to take down your garden, tips and tricks that I've learned, and maybe you guys can learn a few things. For clarification, this is a garden takedown video. If you're looking for tips on how to start a garden, I would go to my Instagram page. I have a whole story highlight dedicated to gardening, and I talk about how we set up the garden a few years ago. I talk about what we use for natural fertilizers that aren't going to hurt the plants or hurt you or make them become dependent. I talk about ways that I keep the garden flourishing throughout the entire season. And I really go into the best practices for starting your garden. So this is all about what you can do after you take down your garden. I will talk a little bit about the garden itself, do some review there, but a lot of this is going to be about the end of season. So if you're looking for the beginning of season and starting a garden, go to my Instagram. I'll have it linked below. A few basics I wanted to talk about before we get started. One, always have some good gardening clothes. So in Minnesota, we are getting into like the 60-degree weather right now. Today is just really beautiful and sunny, as you can tell, but a lot of our days are becoming more chilly. And so I always just recommend long sleeves in general and long pants, but that's also a safety thing. For us, we have cages and we have chicken wire around our stuff. More sharp objects. You're moving around trying to pull apart plants. Plants have natural protectors that can be spiky. So always be prepared to have something warm, something that covers your body. Have a good pair of tennis shoes that are good for working outside. The other thing I always recommend for people who are asking about gardens is if you have the space, make a big garden. I think this one, if I can remember correctly, is like 17 by 5. We have a very big backyard, as you can see, and we even built ours into, we have a little bit of a hill on the back side of our house, but plants love to have space. So if you can only start with pots, that's okay. We've been there. We used to have pots lining the back of our home, and we would just grow tomatoes and cucumbers and peppers out of that, but they did not thrive as much as they do in this big, like spread out environment. It's kind of the same idea of like a fish in a bowl. If you have a little tiny bowl, it doesn't get very big and it doesn't really thrive in there. But if you have a whole aquarium, it does better. The other thing too, I haven't seen this a lot, so I don't know if this is like a popular thing to do right now, but my parents had leftover cinder blocks from building a wall in the back side of our house. So I really like the cinder block walls. I've seen sometimes where the stand-up gardens that are wood will crack or have water damage, and a cinder block will hold all your dirt, because there's probably, if I had to guess, thousands of pounds of dirt that I'm standing on. But you need something that's going to be able to withstand not only the weight of that dirt, but the weight of the plants, the root system. For us, again, it's built on a hill, so we have to think about gravity. We have to think about when it rains really hard, that it can withstand all of that. I'm going to start untying these cages while we talk. One thing I always say to people when they're wanting to start a garden is that it's a lot of trial and error. Unless you've grown up in a household that is full of avid gardeners or farmers, you may not know the best tips and tricks right away. The placement of different plants is really important. What type of soil to use, if plants like more sun or more water. And speaking as an American, we are very disconnected from our food and where it grows and farming practices and our meat and how it's created. I recently saw a statistic, and I'm probably going to get some of this wrong, but it said 15% of citizens in the United States now do farming. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't do gardening like flowers or like we have at our house, but I do think there is something to that. We have a lot of jobs that are online. We have a lot of jobs that are over the phone, and there are not as many hands-on jobs as there used to be. I think there's something really beautiful about getting outside and getting in the dirt and working with your hands and creating something that grows into this beautiful space. And then I think there's also something beautiful about learning about change in the end of a season and how to handle that well, that I think translates really well into the way that we live. And when we start to take that out, it just feels like a mundane cycle every single day. I kind of compare it to like summer vacation for children. Children have these different points in the school year where they know they're going to get a break, and adults do not have that. Many American adults do not have hobbies. We do not have break times that are designated, and life becomes very mundane and repetitive. And there's something just beautiful about learning how to have a moment of rest or how to grow something and then know when it's time to let it go. There's something about that that translates into real life that we don't get elsewhere, and I think it's really important. Going back to the trial and error of it all, we have tried a bunch of different types of plants in the garden. We have tried different fruits. We have tried different types of tomatoes and peppers and cucumbers. In 2023, we did zucchini and it slayed. I loved the zucchini bread I made last year. So it's okay to try out different things, to do trial and error, to put things in different spots within the garden. We used to put the tomatoes further back, and then we realized that they do like sun, but they also like some relief from the sun. And like the zucchini, we did that back corner where we now have a pepper this year, and the zucchini loved being in the shade. And as you can see, different times of the year and different weather can also change how things grow. Our tomatoes got too cold and they're starting to go down. And then our cucumber, on the other hand, back here is thriving. We've tried placement all over the garden. We always do the cages just as a basic barrier against animals. They're pretty wide set. Sometimes rabbits and squirrels will get in at the beginning of the season. We do put chicken wire on there as well for an added layer of protection. We've also done different types of fertilizer throughout the years. We are really blessed to have a neighbor named Gary who knows a lot about gardening and has had a garden many years before we started. We knew from the beginning to be mindful of the type of fertilizer that we put on our food because we're going to ingest it and eat it, and you don't want to have a bunch of chemicals and unnatural things in the fertilizer that you use for your own personal garden. Unfortunately, we can't always control what goes into our food from the grocery stores, but we can control what goes into our homegrown gardens. This year, if you watched my Instagram, we went with a mixture of a couple of different natural fertilizers. The dirt when we planted it was mixed, I believe, with like a grass-fed cow manure. And I'm going to get some of this wrong, I'm sure. But as I understand it, when you use manure, you want it to sit for a while because otherwise it will burn the plants. So it sat mixed with dirt for a few years, and then a farmer came and delivered it. He like drove his truck into our backyard, and that's the base of our garden, is like a dark, rich black dirt mixed with manure. When we plant the plants, we do usually some mix of coop poop, which is chicken poop, and then we also have done like an at-home compost bin. So I call it the sludge. We have this plastic bin in our basement because it smells horrendous. And we put some of that black dirt in there that we had left over that we didn't put into the garden. And then over like a 3-year period, we put in apple cores and cucumbers and lettuce and eggshells. And we had worms in there that were irrigating the dirt, that was breaking down all the food waste to go into the dirt. And that just, again, is like an aid with the coop poop, with a good dirt base that helps these plants thrive. And it sounds kind of gross because there's a lot of poop involved, but it doesn't get on your plant. Like it's just in the root system and it's basically feeding it. It's like when you go and do a workout and you start with a really good protein powder. It's like a jump start for the plant. The rest of the cages that are out are intertwined with the plants. So I'm going to take a couple minutes and start cutting down these plants, and we'll talk about what you should do with the remainder of the plant at the end of a season, what you should do with your garden to protect it if you live in an area where you're not planting and growing all year long. The first thing I'm going to do is start picking any leftover fruit or vegetable that you have. Even if they are not fully developed or the tomatoes are green, we're going to try and take them in and give them a longer life, and hopefully they will continue to mature within the sunlight in our home. As you can see, I have acquired 2 buckets of vegetables. I'll probably find more as I cut down that cucumber plant and I really get into it. So far, we have 2 full buckets of vegetables that will either continue to grow and mature, or if they do not, they'll become mulch for the garden going forward. A lot of the tomatoes are green right now, but we're going to put them in our 3-season porch and they will become sun-ripened tomatoes. Now I'm going to start the process of cutting down the plants. And I want to talk about something I changed last year that has worked really well for our garden. I used to fully pull the plant out and just have the root system be on the top and create some of that mulch like I'm talking about with the leftover little tomatoes. And you'll see once I cut off all the stems and the leaves, they also will become the mulch for the garden. But last year, I left the root system in and just let it continue to create the environment underground that it needed to create. And so I've been recommending that to people. Our plants did beautifully this year. And so I'm going to leave the root system intact once more so that it can create that environment underground that is healthiest for the garden next year. So now the part we've all been waiting for. Let's take down this garden and I'll show you what we do with this space as we go forward into colder months in Minnesota. As you can see, we now have the roots intact, but all of the stems and the leaves are laid out across the garden bed. I'm keeping the cages over on the side, but they will not be there for the entire winter. What we usually do is as we go further into fall, it's like mid-October right now, and as we get further into fall, leaves will come down from the trees, and then we take the leaves and we have an adapter on our mower that will gather the leaves, mulch them up into a bag, and then I take the bag and I spread it across the entire garden bed. And that layer is a layer of protection from the ecosystem below that we talked about earlier. So it helps as the winter months go on, as there is snow or ice or severe weather. Everything below the surface does get cold. Obviously, it's outside, but the ecosystem itself of the roots and of the plants doesn't get bothered. It doesn't get tousled. It doesn't get moved. And then as we go into spring, all of this mulch breaks down and it becomes nutrients for the soil for next year. I do other plants outside of the garden. I have a few pots on our porch in the back that have herbs and spices and different things growing for cooking. So kind of my thought process behind this is I have an area for the actual food products and then the things that make the food products taste good, basically. But when I get rid of the herbs and spices and things that are on their last leg at the end of the season, I do the same thing. I find some open patches and I put them in there. So this is my lemon basil, and we'll see if she comes out with one hand. I might need my other hand. Ooh, there we go. And I see an open patch here, so I think I'll throw her down here. I wanted to finish this video talking about how gardens can be an expensive hobby. It not only takes time to create gardens and create a space for your food to grow and an ecosystem for your food to grow, but it also takes cost financially of the best dirt, of different types of natural fertilizers. It takes time to create like a compost bin or dirt composted in your basement like we have, the sludge that I talked about earlier. All of these things have taken time and they've taken resources that not everybody has. I just wanted to say if you are just starting out and you're not sure if you like gardening, I always recommend the little round tubs at different gardening places. They're bigger than a regular potted plant or even one of the clay pots, but they do provide enough space for at least one plant to grow if you want to start with one plant each and kind of get your hand at it. And then the cost is also diminished in comparison to a 17 by 5 foot garden that you can fit your whole body in. It also costs time and money for the plants themselves. We're really blessed and lucky to have a neighbor named Gary, and he grows all of the seedlings for us. So he does like hundreds of different types of tomatoes. He has a massive garden in his backyard, and he really is the one that I do credit, him and my dad, for how I know anything about gardening or what is the best thing for gardening. They both are very interested in it, and they research, and they've taught me everything they know. And I think gardening can be something where it's not only for you to have autonomy over what's going in your body and autonomy over the land that you own, but it also is something where multi-generationally people can come together and do this type of hobby together. I really encourage people who have the resources and the time to create something like this to make it educational and to also make it communal and to provide resources for people who maybe have food instability as well. That is it for this video. I am all done taking down the garden. I'm sad it's at the end of the season, but I am also excited for fall time and for winter and for what's to come. If you have any other questions about gardening, go ahead and put them down in the comments. I'll do my best to either respond with the knowledge I have or seek out my 2 experts that I just aforementioned. Please like this video, please subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you in the next one.